Hello and welcome today to College Success Strategies with me, Mr. Fowler. I'm happy that you can join me today to discuss this little video lecture. I know that we are a distance learning course exclusively online. However, as per some of your suggestions throughout the semester, I've tried to find a couple of opportunities to try to get students engaged outside of just the regular internet structure. So if you're live with me now, thank you so much for joining me. And if you're watching this video at a future date, I hope that some of this discussion is relevant or interesting for you and your time. Okay, I'm joined today by Tiana and Caitlin, and we are discussing the video link to William Zhou's TEDx talk, Should Technology Replace Teachers? Obviously, this is a very sensitive topic for someone in my position, but I think this semester, with all of us going to a more online friendly formats for teaching, it's a relevant question that should be asked and has been asked in numerous formats since the COVID-19 outbreak. I don't wish to suggest that everything has changed or will change due to this outbreak, but I think that when events like this occur, they do force us to think about certain questions and ask about things that are a little bit challenging for some of our regular worldviews. Okay, without further ado, let's get into this. I'm going to edit my screen view so that it's a little bit smoother. And as I do so, I will bring up a PowerPoint so that you'll have some visual reference. I'll also be referring back and forth to some of the links from Zhou's TEDx talk. Okay, here we go. I'm going to stop this video. I'm going to quickly test my system here. Can you both hear me?
I can.
Yes.
Okay, very good. So let me share. Okay. Slideshow from the beginning. So for today's session number 28, we're going to just briefly preview what we've discussed. There's not too much to review today. There is one small reminder for this past week. I placed quiz 6 up on the Desire to Learn page so that you could review and adequately prepare for that quiz. A couple of quick notes about that. Just remember that number one, you can take this quiz as many times as you wish. You can do that for any quiz for the entirety of the semester. And this particular quiz, number 6, will focus on our text, College Success Strategies, by Sherry Nistel-Jelnick and Jody Patrick Holkutch for chapters 12, 13, and 14. 3 chapters for this week's quiz focus. There are some multiple choice questions, some true and false questions, and a couple of short answer questions. So it shouldn't be too daunting, but if you haven't had a chance to complete that yet, remember that you have until Friday to do so. I don't expect anybody will be doing too much work tomorrow for Thanksgiving, but perhaps after you're done with your Black Friday shopping or or if you wait till Cyber Monday, you might have some time on Friday to take that quiz. Okay, so obviously the main part is that of today's lecture is that we are live today on the 25th discussing Zhou's TEDx talk, Should Technology Replace Teachers? So again, reaching out to students today just to try to engage in a little bit of active learning to see what their take on these ideas are. And I posed a couple of different questions to give you some background and help you sort of simmer into this concept. William Zhou is a Canadian internet entrepreneur. He is the founder of Chalk.com, which is a K-12 education website dedicated to helping students learn online and enhance their learning, to enhance their in-person learning by facilitating other tutoring, teaching, and research resources for students in the Canadian public and private high schools. He was named in Forbes 30 Under 30. He's a frequent commentator on social media and standard media about technology and education and where those two constructs meet. He's also a very engaging speaker. I found him to be very viewable and watchable. So at the core of this, we have a larger question, which we'll refer back to. Should teachers be replaced with technology? So over here on the left, you have a very typical picture that probably was something we've all encountered in one form or another in our educational background. Whereas this more amorphous, kind of ambiguous image over here on the right suggests that technology may someday or in some instance replace teachers. So this is a question I find very curious, and it's an idea that I've dealt with in some of my other classes. In my 103 level course or my Composition 1 course, we read Ready Player One. And one of the big questions or concerns for the papers in that class and the discussions that we have is this idea of whether or not the futuristic version of education as depicted in that novel is something akin to what we've experienced or what we may experience at some point in the future, or what at least what we theorize we may experience. So in terms of questions for consideration, do you feel that Zhou's assessment of the educational process in America today as feeling detached is accurate? In other words, if you were engaged in high school, what do you think made those instructors or those classes unique or compelling? And again, just in a visual sense, were you more like the student on the left here, or was your experience more akin to something like the image on the right? What do you think? We'll start with Tiana and then we'll hear from Caitlin. Did you feel that your American, or you're not American necessarily, but because I don't want to be presumptuous, but do you feel like your secondary educational process were you detached from that, or were you relatively engaged?
I would say I was engaged. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Caitlin, how about yourself?
I feel like it really depended on like who the teacher was and what the class was, because some of the things I just wasn't particularly interested in. So I wasn't very, I didn't feel very involved in the class. And there were some other ones that I was like very involved because I liked the class and I liked the teacher.
Mm-hmm. So, and I'm not trying to put words into your mouth, but as an assessment, it seems like it was kind of dependent upon the instructor more so than or was it a combination of the two, the instructor and the topic?
I feel like it was a combination because there were some classes that I was like, I'm not going to like this class at all. I'm going to hate it. But then when I got to the class, I actually liked it because of my teacher that I had.
Okay. So that's important, I think. And we've discussed this in various modes throughout the semester. And it's also a topic that our authors are quite concerned with. But I agree. For me personally, it was a mix of the two. Back to you, Tiana. You said that you felt relatively engaged as a student. you had fairly good instructors or teachers, and your courses were interesting. Is that right?
Yeah, yes, it was.
Okay.
It is right.
Well, and that's wonderful. That's what I think a lot of instructors hope that all of our students' reactions would be. So I think your teachers would be very, very happy to hear about this. So this is one note, and this is the reason I'm bringing this up, is that in the entire TEDx talk, this is one point where I thought Zhou maybe stumbled or spoke out of turn, because he compares the American school system to generally this kind of disengaged, I think is the term he uses, but a sort of disengaged sense of activity, or a generally lesser level of engagement than we would ideally hope for. Okay, so you can see here in this video, he gets into this pretty early on.
This is a story of a cult favorite, best-selling, waitlist-inducing.
Well, I'm not going to share a commercial with you. Sorry about that.
Sick of the clutter in my kitchen. I realized if it were created just right.
There we go. Sorry about that. Let me share this with you now.
In the past 12 months, the world has welcomed the birth of 142 million children. Yet 63 million of them will never reach high school, let alone graduate. All of these 142 million children start life at the same point with similar potentials. So why is it that the end results of their education be so vastly different? Well, the sad and actually disappointing answer is that who you are and where you come from matters way more than it should. Simply being rich can put you a year ahead of others. And in fact, family income is actually one of the best predictors of a child's success in school. And this has created this huge inequality in the world. And the best and the worst OECD countries, if you compare them, the difference is actually equivalent of holding a child back for 2 full years. Now, studies have shown that a small tweak within the education system can have huge rippling effects within the economy. The United States alone can add up to $72 trillion in aggregate GDP across the lifespan of all these 142 million children if they meet the baseline achievement. I don't think that's so much to ask. And in fact, I think our children should at least meet the baseline achievement. So as you can see, education is a powerful tool to break the cycle of poverty and inequality. Now, most of us in this room have gone to school that had this factory model, so to speak. Why is it called a factory model? Well, you may know that this factory model was built for the industrial era of the 20th century, right? In this model, subjects were taught separately and children were separated by the year of their birth. And in this model, children were taught to sit neatly in their spaces, respond to commands, be punctual, be efficient. Well, something you actually would probably need on a factory floor, but maybe not so much today. And in this model, even the school days and weeks were designed for another era, where students have to be let out to work in the fields, and when there's always somebody at home at 3 in the afternoon. Information is passed down from an authoritative figure to a student who's sitting just in their spot. So this all sounds very old school, right? Why is that still around? Well, it turns out this model, again, was built for the last century, and it was built specifically with the purpose of transferring knowledge as efficiently and scalable as possible. And when you view it in that perspective, you know what? It actually did its job. It did quite well, in fact. You can argue that literacy around the world went up, but it missed out on some key aspects. See, this model of instruction created uniformity across the student body. And in fact, students who have now gone to high school, as many as 40 to 60% of them are chronically disengaged towards learning. And out of every 10 students that enter school, 2 in Latin America, 3 in Southwest Asia, and 4 in Sub-Saharan Africa drop out. So if we all know that schooling leads to a better life, better health, and better prospects, how do we keep our kids engaged so they stay in school? And as we move into this so-called knowledge-based economy where skills matter now more than facts, how do we adapt this education system to this new model?
Okay. Oops, looks like I had some people join and drop back out. That's okay. So in the interim time, he raises this really interesting question and brings up a couple of facts that I think are worthy of our discussion. So I'm going to stop my video for just a second and share this PowerPoint again. As he said, a number of people categorize their level of involvement as disengaged. And like you both said, it could be due to the subject or the instructor in the instance that you're thinking about. But he also brings up this idea of education today. Again, over here on the left, pretty typical experience that I think a lot of people have probably encountered before. And then over here on the right, sort of the factory model equivalent of how the skills that might be learned in this environment over on the left would translate to this or a similar kind of construct on the right. And I found that to be a compelling idea. So in terms of questions for consideration, number one, does it surprise you to learn that big manufacturing had such an important impact on the development and the structure of American education? So what do you think about this idea? Did that concept surprise you, or did you find it to be strange or foreign? Caitlin, let's start with you this time. And then we'll go back and hear from Tiana. But number one, did it surprise you to hear that businesses around the turn of the 20th century, about 100 years ago, in other words, sort of formulated the model that we still are using today?
No, that didn't really surprise me.
Okay. Do you feel like that this is an effective way to enhance your learning, or do you feel like the system that is time tested shouldn't be challenged because if it's not broke, don't fix it? Like, where do you come down on that side of the discussion?
I feel like the hours for school should be changed, because typically that's not even how most parents because parents sometimes have to drop their kids off somewhere else before school even starts, because that's not when their job starts, or they have to go to daycare after school because that's not when their job ends. So
Right.
if we did more of like a 9 to 5 or something, like how most jobs are, then maybe it could be better.
No, go ahead. Yeah. And I'm sorry for stepping over what you're saying, but I'm encouraged by your feedback here. That is quite a drastic change in terms of how our society runs according to the timetable that was established by traditional education. Most people, as you said, work. Actually, I don't know if I can say most people, but certainly the image of the idea of working 9 to 5 presents its own set of challenges for students and their parents. Now, if we were to expand even that thought process to students whose parents work non-traditional hours, who work a second or third shift job, then we can see that education is really challenged by notions that do not conform to a cycle or a time cycle that was constructed and that worked for the majority of the people at the turn of the last century. Now, Tiana, same question for you. Did this idea or concept surprise you? And how do you feel about the system? Is it working well enough, or if it's not broken, we shouldn't worry about it? What's your take on it?
I think it needs to be fixed. Yes. The fact he said that people who have more money are more successful in getting a better education. I do agree with him, because if you have more money, you have less problems, more education, more ways to get through life. So I do think it needs to be changed. And then you said she said something about parenting, schooling. What about children and schooling and working? When children work as well as go to school, that's another point.
Well, that is a great point, especially I think in the U.S. In terms of the latter years of high school, there may still be expectations for students to work outside the home. I think you can get a worker permit at age 14, and you could work part-time. And then obviously at age 16, you can work part-time legally in the U.S. I come from a very rural community, so I know that it's very traditional for young people to start working around the age of 14 in some capacity or another, unless they're in sports. I'm careful in my language there. I don't say extracurriculars, because there's this strange relationship in rural America, or at least in my experience, that sports is like an equivalent time usage is for work, right? So it's almost expected that if you're in a sport, you're going to work toward being adept at that sport, or you're going to seek a job outside of outside of school in the time that you have available. But if you're in an academic pursuit, there's not necessarily the expectation that you can't work in an academic club, organization, or a pursuit and then not have a job. But the sport is different. And I think there's a certain amount of logic there, but I'm going astray here. Back to Tiana's point, not only does the current design of the educational system expect that students that parents are going to adapt to the schedule without issue, but they also expect that to be the case of students. And to back up what you brought, one of your concerns there, Tiana, there have been multiple studies that suggest as students reach the age of 11 to 16, those are 5 of the most crucial years for psychological and physical well-being and healthy development. And they said that you might actually need extra time to sleep, even to just do something as basic as facilitate growth, physical growth. And so many education advocates suggest a start time to the school day of about 10:30 or later. And they, of course, they suggest that you can actually minimize the amount of time that is spent in a typical school day. And by saying, well, maybe if your school day starts at 10:30, you could end the school day around 5 or 5:30, or perhaps even sooner if need be, focusing on those core supplemental contents on a Monday to Thursday schedule, and then leave Friday for your extracurriculars. That would, I think, be a really healthy way to adapt our current school climate and scheduling system. But as Caitlin has said, we've now built into the idea of a school day that typically starts somewhere between 8 o'clock and ends around 2:30 or 3. We've created this odd system where there is a not only reliance or dependence upon the school, but an expectation that they would be available to help rear children before and after school in some variety of program or other. And what's become very difficult now is that as we've continued to allow the system to grow and solidify as a structure, to change that challenges many of the expectations of students and their parents as well. Because there are some parents that depend on a school day starting at 8 o'clock and going until 5 or 5:30, so that they're, and this includes the provision of meals. It certainly includes the provision of lunch, and in many cases, a breakfast or some kind of afternoon snack as well. And again, this heaps more burdens upon the school system as it currently exists. So I certainly think that there is at least a role for education and for technology to step in to try to correct some of, or at least help parents and students mitigate the change in what we've seen so far. Obviously, with COVID-19, everything went to an online format. So I think a lot of people are being challenged by these unconventional times and these very strange changes to the system of education. Because if you've got a dutiful student who's home and they're learning online, they might not have a school day that is beginning at 8 o'clock and ending at 3 o'clock. Their school day, at least for part of the week, might just begin and end at that student's discretion. So a dutiful student could start work at 8 o'clock and perhaps move through their work by noon, and then they're done for the day. That, again, is very disruptive to someone who, a parent, for example, who's working at home and now has this other child that they have to manage in addition to the work that they're doing, probably also online. And for those parents who aren't fortunate enough to be able to work from home, then their child is alone, unsupervised for half of the day. So the concerns and potential corrections or assistance that can be offered by technology is something that we're going to have to take a hard look at as a society. Caitlin, back to you. One of the things that you brought up reminds me of this Family Guy episode. Now, I don't know if you ladies are fans of Family Guy, or those of you watching this, in hindsight are fans. But there's one episode where, under the ridiculous premise of the show, Peter Griffin is selected to be the principal of his child's high school. And he gets ready to leave for the morning. And he says, well, I've got to go to work because school starts at 7:45 for some reason. And I found this to be incredibly funny because that's when my school used to start. It never started at 8. It started at 7:45 so that we could eke out extra 15 minutes. And then we would exit school that much earlier. It was kind of strange and nonsensical. We've also talked about some of the ways that unstable internet connection. There we go. We've also talked about the ways that the change in economy from a more agrarian economy to a more like a factory sort of economy, industrial economy. That's the word I was struggling to find. And now we're in a type of mixed economy where we have a little bit of manufacturing, a little bit of agriculture, and a little bit of distance or remote, sales and remote work. So I find that what both of you have said to be very interesting and worthy of our time and attention as a concern for the future of education. Any last thoughts or additional ideas before we move ahead to the next question?
I'm good.
Tiana, how about yourself?
It's not working. Sorry, I'm good.
Okay. All right, let's move on then. Okay. So the other component that he brings up in his discussion is this idea of how technology can be used in education. So we have a more traditional idea of education over here on the right. And on the left, you have all of these various applications that we see being used to facilitate education today. It's not impossible to say that you could get a fairly quality education from your phone now. But, but I feel like these two sort of diverse representations of what education can be or could be work better when they work together in tandem. And I think Zhou has some very interesting things to say about that same process.
How do we even prepare our children for jobs that don't even exist yet? I think a lot of us forget that a ton of jobs that we're in today didn't exist 2 decades ago. See, from my perspective, I think there should be an urgency to improve this education system. Because today, as it stands now, we're failing to maximize the potential of our children. See, equal opportunity education should mean that the system doesn't hold you back or leave you behind. The system should instead meet you where you are and set you up for success. I'll give you a hint, it's not doing that right now. And in that way, see, a high quality education system should be teaching, engaging the learners, capturing the imagination, and building on skills like critical thinking or creativity. And in the last half a decade, it's becoming a buzzword even today, personalization, right? It's all about personalization, and we're all about personalization. And that's really held as the holy grail to achieve this new model of education. But guess what? Personalization actually is not a new concept. It's actually close to a century old. I'll tell you a story. In 1926, a gentleman named Sidney Precy invented this machine. It was sort of this big, and it sat on students' desks, right? Every student got one of them. And it had 2 modes of instruction, right? One is called teach and one is called test. So as a student, you don't need a teacher in that sense. You come in, sit down, review your materials, understand what you're being taught, and when you're ready at your own pace, switch over to the test mode. 1 question at a time will pop up, and the machine had 4 different levers, which the student could press down on. Right? Many of you know that as in today's multiple choice test version. And so the student, in a way, could go on, complete the work at their own pace, and learn the material. Now, you can even add a reward dial to this machine. Answer a question correctly, you can get, say, a piece of candy. So if you're a really good student, you could actually have a very sweet tooth at the end of the day. And this, by the way, was 1926. And this was called the teaching machine. So why don't we see this teaching
Sorry about that. Okay, I think we got to the essential parts. Waiting for the, there you go. I think we got to the essential parts that I wanted to discuss. Can you both still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Tiana, can you hear me? I might have lost Tiana, but Tiana, if you can hear me, I'll open up the chat if you want to write anything here. So if you wish to respond, you may. There we go. So Tiana is available on chat. But I just wanted to ask you both about this idea that Zhou brings up about personalization and whether or not you need the instructor to be there to hold your hand through the educational process. Alternatively, rather than this concept of the teacher holding your hand and guiding you through things, I think there's also a certain level of engagement that goes on. And later in his discussion, Zhou says that there's a reason that the multiple choice or test or teacher machine did not work. I mean, this was all the way back in 1926. By the time I was being educated in the 80s, there was no such machine attached to each of our desks or anything like that. So obviously there has been a back and forth between how much technology is necessary for students to become engaged in a course. And I would ask this of you for your second sort of discussion question for the day. And I'll start with Tiana. You can either type it into the chat, or you can, if your microphone's working, you can reestablish your connection. Is there a percentage, or is there an ideal version of how much time the teacher needs to spend or interact with students in order to facilitate learning? Or should we maybe move toward this idea of more personalized education where the technology allows students to advance at their own pace?
You know what? I like the last one, but I am a person who likes in-person teaching. I do not do computer, but I don't know. So far, I'm doing good in my class, but I'd rather have my teacher in front of me teaching me so I can ask that person question. Over the internet, you have to be typing out some things, and then most of the time the information doesn't get out, or the person doesn't understand what you're saying. So it's a bit of both for me.
Okay. So there needs to be I think that's where a lot of us have found ourselves kind of agreeing on the level of interactivity. And as you say, Tiana, and I think it's very well put, you crave, I think, a personalized level of interaction, even if the material itself is a little bit more self-paced. And I think ideally that's something I, as an instructor, would like to see, especially for high school modalities. I'd like to see that change so that the instructor is always there within the space of the classroom, because humans crave a person-to-person level of interaction, but students all move at different levels and have different levels of capacity. So I think that would be something akin to an ideal. And this is possible, and we know it is because that's how we started education in America. That's what the one-room schoolhouse used to be like. There were students in every level within the contents of one room. And at some point, we kind of gravitated toward this idea that everybody should be advancing together at the same rate, which is a wonderful idea. I'm not sure how practical it has become, though. And so I think it's interesting that you say there's a mix that would be your preferred method, so that the online delivery would allow you to move at your own pace, or whatever kind of technological based delivery system would allow a student to move at his or her own pace, but still facilitate time with the teacher and the student in order to get to have the best of both worlds, if you will. Caitlin, how
Yes.
about your take on this? Oh, sorry, Tiana, what else?
No, I was just agreeing with you. Yes.
Okay, yeah, and I thought that was, like I said, that was relatively well put. Caitlin, what is your take on this idea?
I think that it honestly depends on like where you are in your like for like the little kids, they're gonna need more of the teacher there because they're not gonna know how to work the technology themselves. So they need more help. Whereas when you get like older, like into high school and college, there can be more of the like computer involvement because they're more independent already.
Okay. Again, that's another good consideration. It's not only a question of technology and availability. It's a question of what is best and what is most appropriate for certain age groups. And Zhou, at the beginning of his lecture, talks about that. One of the uniform things for early education was that everybody was within the same age range and they advanced together. Whereas under a system of, as Tiana mentioned, under a system where you combine technology and the instructor, you may see some students advancing relatively more quickly. As you point out, Caitlin, when they're younger, there may be more of a learning curve about adapting to technology. Whereas in high school and junior high, I could see students, moving up or down the, or I would say moving up the scale, or rising incrementally as need be according to their efforts. That creates a whole other host of social issues and questions that we don't have time to get into today. But that's a very possible model for the future of education. And I think both of you brought up some really interesting points about how that may unfold in the future. Let's see here. I want to share this PowerPoint. I think we pretty much covered everything. Yeah, how do you see technology being used in education? We talked about that a little bit. Do you all have any other questions or concerns about this topic?
I don't.
Any other? Okay.
No.
How about yourself, Tiana?
No, I don't.
Okay. Well, I do want to be, like I said, conscientious of your time. I'm not sure how much time you need for this, for any of your other classes today. I may be the only class that tried to do something today before Thanksgiving. I don't know, but I want to go ahead and wrap things up. And if you do have other concerns, let you attend to those. So I want to thank you both for your time and your attention today. And we will, I will be in communication next Monday, which will be the 30th, I believe, November 30th, just to round up that month. And then we will be moving on. Don't forget to try quiz 6 if you haven't done so already. And remember that we will be looking for those reflection essays at the end of next week, on or before December 3rd. Okay. Yes.
When you're finished with life, can you go over the reflection essay with me?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Okay, Well, I'm going to let anybody who needs to go take care of that. Again, thanks so much for your time, your attention. This is Mr. Fowler reminding you to stay hungry for knowledge and stay healthy. Take care, everyone.